What would you do if the absolute worst week of your life ended with a set of rusty keys to a rotting cabin in the woods? For one ruined entrepreneur, a forced exile into the wilderness didn't just hide her from her debts. It unlocked a multi-million-dollar empire hidden in the floorboards. Chloe Davenport sat in her idling, decade-old Honda Civic, listening to the rhythmic, agonizing thud of the windshield wipers. The Oregon rain was relentless, mirroring the total and complete devastation of her life over the past 7 days. Just a month ago, she had been on the cover of a local Portland business magazine, heralded as the city's next big tech innovator. Her logistics software startup, Aeroflow Systems, had just secured a massive round of angel investment. She had a sprawling loft in the Pearl District and a diamond engagement ring on her left hand from a man she thought she would spend the rest of her life with, Richard Kingsley. Then the floor gave out. It started on a Tuesday when the FBI raided the Aeroflow offices. Chloe's trusted co-founder and best friend of 10 years, Natalie Ford, had systematically embezzled the investor funds, funneling millions into offshore accounts before vanishing into the wind. Because Natalie had forged Chloe's signature on a dozen critical banking documents, the authorities froze every single asset Chloe possessed. Her personal savings, her business accounts, her credit cards. Everything was locked down. When the news broke, Richard didn't offer a shoulder to cry on. He packed his designer suitcases while Chloe sat numbly on their leather sofa. "I can't be tied to a sinking ship, Chloe," he had said, not even looking her in the eye as he called an Uber to take him to the airport. "My firm won't tolerate the PR nightmare." "I'm sorry." By Friday, Chloe was facing imminent eviction and a mountain of legal debt just to prove her innocence. She had exactly $42.16 in a secondary checking account she had opened in college. She was homeless, betrayed, and utterly destroyed. It was in this state of catatonic despair that she received a certified letter from Garrison and Finch, a small law firm specializing in estate management. Seated in a dusty office that smelled heavily of lemon polish and stale coffee, an elderly attorney named Gregory Finch slid a manila folder across his mahogany desk. "Your great-uncle, Theodore Wallace, passed away 3 weeks ago," Finch explained, his voice like dry gravel. "He was a reclusive man. Never married, no children. Your mother was his only niece, and since her passing, you are his sole surviving blood relative." Chloe had stared at the lawyer blankly. She vaguely remembered Uncle Theodore, a bizarre, paranoid man who lived off the grid and refused to use banks, electricity, or modern medicine. Her family had long written him off as a lost cause. "He didn't have much, Miss Davenport," Finch continued gently, opening the folder to reveal a single brass key tarnished with age. "But he did leave you the deed to his property. It's a cabin on 12 acres of dense timberland near the Tillamook State Forest. The property taxes are fully paid up for the next 10 years. It isn't much, but it is entirely yours, free and clear." With no money for a hotel and nowhere else to go, Chloe had packed whatever clothes fit into the trunk of her sputtering Honda and drove west into the mountains. The drive was a treacherous, winding ascent through a tunnel of towering Douglas firs. The GPS cut out an hour before she reached the coordinates Finch had provided. When she finally turned onto an overgrown, unmarked gravel path, the underbrush scraped against the sides of her car like fingernails. The cabin was a nightmare. Looming at the end of the dead-end trail, the structure looked as though it was actively being swallowed by the forest. The roof sagged under a thick blanket of wet, green moss. The front porch canted sharply to the left, Its wooden floorboards rotted through in several places. The windows were opaque with decades of grime, and the surrounding yard was a graveyard of rusted metal barrels, a broken-down 1970s Ford pickup truck, and towering weeds. Clutching the brass key, Chloe stepped out into the freezing rain. The silence of the woods was deafening, broken only by the steady drip of water from the pine needles. She navigated the treacherous porch, slid the key into the heavy iron deadbolt, and pushed. The door groaned open, resisting her efforts, heavily swollen from years of dampness. Inside, the smell was atrocious, a suffocating mixture of mildew, wood rot, and stale air. The cabin was essentially one large room, with a tiny walled-off bathroom in the corner. Ancient, peeling wallpaper hung in strips like dead skin. The furniture consisted of a stained mattress on the floor, a wood-burning stove covered in a thick layer of soot, and stacks upon stacks of old newspapers, jars, and broken electronics, hoarded by a man clearly suffering from severe paranoia. Chloe dropped her duffel bag onto the dusty floorboards. The temperature inside was dropping rapidly as the sun dipped behind the mountain ridge. There was no electricity, no running water, no cellular service. She was completely isolated from the world that had just chewed her up and spat her out. She wrapped herself in 3 layers of sweaters and her winter coat, huddled in the corner of the filthy mattress, and listened to the wind howl through the cracks in the walls. For the first time since the FBI raid, Chloe wept. She cried for her stolen company, for Richard's cowardly abandonment, for the paralyzing injustice of it all. She fell asleep shivering, convinced that her life was functionally over. The morning sun offered no warmth, but its harsh light pouring through the grimy windows revealed the full, depressing reality of Theodore Wallace's home. Chloe woke up stiff, her breath forming small white clouds in the freezing air. Her stomach rumbled aggressively, reminding her that she had survived on a half-empty bag of pretzels since yesterday afternoon. If she was going to survive out here, even just for a few days while she figured out how to sell the land, she needed to make the place habitable. At the very least, she needed a fire. Chloe dragged herself off the mattress and began investigating the cabin in the daylight. Behind the rusted wood-burning stove, she found a stack of surprisingly dry, split cedar logs. It took her 20 minutes and half a box of damp matches from her glove compartment, but she finally managed to coax a small, crackling fire into existence. As the ambient temperature slowly rose, so did her desperate need to assert some kind of control over her chaotic existence. She couldn't fix her bank accounts or the criminal investigation in Portland, but she could clean this horrific room. She started with the trash. Armed with a roll of heavy-duty garbage bags she found in the trunk of her car, Chloe began clearing out the endless stacks of hoarded junk. There were hundreds of empty mason jars, rusted gears, bundles of yellowed newspapers from 1994, and bizarre, paranoid journals filled with Theodore's cramped handwriting. The entries were mostly manic ramblings about the government, the banking system, and the impending collapse of society. It was mid-afternoon, as she was dragging her 5th heavy trash bag toward the front door, that she noticed the anomaly. Chloe had spent years as an engineer before founding her logistics software company. Her brain was wired for spatial reasoning and geometry. As she looked at the back wall of the cabin, the wall supposedly separating the main room from the tiny bathroom, something didn't line up. She walked outside into the biting cold and paced the exterior length of the cabin wall. 32 feet. She went back inside and paced the interior wall. 24 feet. Even accounting for the bathroom, there was an 8-foot gap of unaccounted space. Her heart did a strange flutter. Was there a hidden room? She grabbed a heavy iron fireplace poker and began tapping along the back wall, moving past the bathroom door. Thud, 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 solid wood. She moved toward the corner, tapping behind a towering bookshelf crammed with mouldy encyclopedias. Thud, thud. Hollow. Adrenaline, sharp and electric, pierced through her exhaustion. Chloe gripped the heavy wooden bookshelf and, digging her boots into the floorboards, pulled with all her might. With a screech of rusted nails and tearing wood, the shelf gave way, toppling backward and sending books flying in a cloud of dust. Behind the shelf was a narrow, heavy wooden door, painted the exact same sickly beige as the walls. There was no doorknob, only a heavy industrial Medico padlock secured through a thick steel hasp. Theodore hadn't just been a hoarder. He had been protecting something. Chloe's hands shook as she inspected the lock. It was a heavy-duty model, the kind used on shipping containers. She didn't have the key. Finch, the lawyer, certainly hadn't given her one. She ran out to the rusted, dilapidated shed she had spotted in the side yard the day before. The shed was a treasure trove of rusty tools. After 10 minutes of frantic searching, she emerged with a 3-foot, heavy steel crowbar. Back inside, she wedged the forked end of the crowbar behind the steel hasp on the wall. She threw her entire body weight against the iron bar. The wood groaned, but the steel held. She tried again, gritting her teeth, sweat beading on her forehead despite the chill in the cabin. The betrayal of Natalie, the sneer on Richard's face, the humiliation of her frozen bank accounts. She channeled every ounce of her rage into her arms. With a deafening crack, the rusted screws tore out of the rotting wood, and the hasp broke free. The heavy padlock clattered to the floor. Chloe pulled the door open. A rush of cold, incredibly stale air hit her face. She expected to find another room full of garbage. Instead, she found a narrow, steep wooden staircase leading sharply upward. It didn't go to a room on the main floor. It went up into the roof pitch. An attic. An attic that wasn't visible from the outside because of the cabin's steeply sloped A-frame design. She retrieved a heavy Maglite flashlight from her car and began the slow climb. The stairs creaked ominously under her weight. At the top of the stairs was another door, this one unlatched. She pushed it open and shined her flashlight into the darkness. The attic was entirely different from the squalor below. It was meticulously clean. The walls were lined with thick, expensive-looking insulation, and the space smelled distinctly of cedar and silica gel desiccants. In the center of the room sat 4 massive, identical olive-green military surplus footlockers. Chloe approached the first trunk, her breath caught in her throat. The heavy metal latches were stiff, but they weren't locked. She snapped the first latch up, then the second. Slowly, she lifted the heavy lid. Inside the trunk, carefully wrapped in heavy plastic sheeting and thick moving blankets, were dozens of meticulously organized leather-bound ledger books. Chloe frowned, feeling a sharp pang of disappointment. More paranoid journals? She picked up the top ledger and opened it. It wasn't a journal. It was a detailed accounting book. But the numbers didn't make sense. 1998. Gold Krugerrands. Quantity, 500. Location, Box 3. 2004. Bearer bonds, Series EE. $250,000. 2010. Silver bullion, 1,000 ounces. Chloe's hands began to tremble so violently, she nearly dropped the book. She dropped to her knees and ripped the plastic sheeting off the rest of the contents in the first trunk. Beneath the ledgers were rows upon rows of heavy, rectangular objects wrapped tightly in canvas. She grabbed one, its weight shocking her, and untied the canvas knot. a dull yellow gleam reflected in the beam of her flashlight. It was a solid bar of gold, stamped with a serial number and the seal of a Swiss refinery. Chloe gasped, dropping it back into the trunk, where it landed with a heavy, muffled thud. She frantically opened the second trunk. It was filled to the brim with velvet pouches. She untied one and poured its contents into her trembling hands. Dozens of pristine, uncirculated vintage gold coins. Uncle Theodore wasn't just a paranoid recluse. He had spent 50 years liquidating his assets, converting every cent he ever made into untraceable precious metals and hiding them in the walls of a rotting cabin. And now, the woman who had lost absolutely everything was sitting in the dark, surrounded by a staggering, undeniable fortune. For 3 days, Chloe Davenport lived in a surreal, freezing purgatory, suspended between absolute poverty and unimaginable wealth. The attic became her sanctuary. Using a battery-powered lantern, she painstakingly catalogued the contents of the 4 military footlockers. Uncle Theodore's meticulous ledgers made the inventory process straightforward, though the sheer magnitude of the hoard defied belief. There were 420 solid gold bars, each weighing 1 kilogram. At current market value, the bars alone were worth roughly $26 million. The velvet pouches contained over 2,000 rare numismatic coins, American double eagles, South African Krugerrands, and pre-1933 gold pieces that carried staggering premiums beyond their melt value. The final trunk held bearer bonds and uncut diamonds hidden inside hollowed-out vintage radio tubes. Chloe, a woman who had been agonizing over a $42 checking account balance just 96 hours ago, was now sitting on a completely untraceable, liquid fortune approaching $35 million. But the gold was a logistical nightmare. She was the prime suspect in a massive federal embezzlement case. Her social security number was flagged, her passport was suspended, and every financial institution in the country was legally obligated to report her movements. She couldn't simply walk into a Chase branch in downtown Portland, slam a 26-pound gold bar onto the teller's counter, and ask to open a checking account. If the authorities caught wind of this wealth, they would immediately seize it under civil asset forfeiture, assuming it was the missing Aeroflow startup capital, regardless of Theodore's ledgers. She needed a phantom network. She needed cash. Most importantly, she needed a lawyer who operated entirely outside the conventional system to dismantle the FBI's case against her. As she sat on the attic floor on the afternoon of the 4th day, wrapping a handful of double eagles in a wool sock to serve as her initial escape funds, the jarring crunch of gravel interrupted the silence of the forest. Chloe froze. The cabin was miles from the nearest paved road. Nobody came up here by accident. She crept quietly down the steep attic stairs, easing the heavy hidden door shut behind her without clicking the hasp. Peeking through a crack in the grimy front window, her stomach plummeted. A sleek black Range Rover had just parked aggressively next to her rusting Honda Civic. 2 men stepped out into the mud. The first was Gregory Finch, the frail, elderly attorney who had handed her the deed. But he no longer looked like a benign, dusty grandfather. He wore a heavy waterproof trench coat, and his eyes scanned the property with a sharp, predatory intensity. The second man was easily 6'4", built like a cinder block, sporting a shaved head and a tactical jacket. He pulled a heavy crowbar from the back of the SUV, the exact kind Chloe had used to break Theodore's lock. Chloe's mind raced, piecing the puzzle together with terrifying clarity. Finch hadn't given her the cabin out of legal obligation. Theodore Wallace was a paranoid ghost. His death likely went unnoticed by the state for weeks. Finch must have handled Theodore's initial land purchase decades ago and knew about the old man's eccentric liquidations. The lawyer had undoubtedly searched the cabin himself, failed to find the hidden attic, and realized that dismantling the place to find the rumored gold would arouse suspicion. So he lured the desperate, bankrupt niece out to the woods. He let her do the heavy lifting, assuming she would either find the gold and try to move it, or she would freeze to death, leaving the property entirely in his control. Now, seeing her car still here after 4 days, he had returned to collect his prize. "Check the perimeter, Donovan," Finch's voice carried through the thin, rotting walls, crisp and authoritative. "If she's inside, secure her. If she found the old man's stash, she won't be eager to share. We do this quietly." Donovan grunted, pulling a suppressed pistol from his waistband. He racked the slide with a metallic clack that echoed like a thunderclap in Chloe's ears. Panic, icy and paralyzing, gripped her lungs. She had survived corporate betrayal and financial ruin, only to be cornered in a rotting box by a corrupt estate lawyer. She looked around the main room. She had no weapons, no cell service to call the police, and the front door was the only way out. But Chloe was an engineer. She understood structural weaknesses, and she understood leverage. She sprinted silently back to the hidden wall. She didn't have time to climb the stairs and lock herself in the attic. Donovan would easily shoot through the wood. Instead, she grabbed the heavy iron fireplace poker and positioned herself behind the toppled bookshelf, pressing her back against the damp wallpaper. The front door groaned in protest before Donovan viciously kicked it open. The door frame splintered, sending rusted screws flying across the room. The large man stepped inside, his pistol raised, sweeping the gloomy interior. Finch followed closely behind, stepping delicately over the threshold to avoid the mud. "Place is a dump," Donovan muttered, his boots crunching on the debris Chloe had swept into the corner. "She's not in here. Look at the fireplace," Finch snapped, pointing his umbrella at the wood-burning stove. "The ashes are fresh, and look at the floor. The dust has been disturbed." She moved that massive shelf. Finch's eyes locked onto the exposed wooden door leading to the attic. The broken hasp dangled uselessly. A greedy, ecstatic smile spread across the old lawyer's wrinkled face. "Theodore, you paranoid old fool, you put it in the ceiling." Finch rushed forward, entirely forgetting about his surroundings, his eyes fixed on the attic door. Donovan lowered his weapon slightly, peering up into the dark stairwell. "You want me to go up first, boss?" No, I want to see it," Finch breathed, stepping onto the first wooden stair. "Stay down here and keep watch. If the girl is up there, I'll flush her out." As Finch ascended the creaking stairs and Donovan turned his back to inspect the tiny bathroom, Chloe knew she had a 3-second window. She tightened her grip on the iron poker. She wasn't just fighting for Theodore's gold anymore. She was fighting for her life. Chloe lunged from the shadows. She didn't aim for Donovan's head. He was too tall, and the risk of missing was too high. Instead, she swung the heavy iron fireplace poker with every ounce of her remaining strength directly at the back of Donovan's right knee. The sickening crack of the kneecap giving way was masked by Donovan's immediate, agonizing roar. The massive man collapsed heavily onto the floorboards, his pistol clattering out of his grip and sliding across the dusty wood. Chloe didn't hesitate. She dove for the weapon, snatching the cold steel from the floor just as Donovan reached out to grab her ankle. She scrambled backward, raising the gun and pointing it directly at his chest. "Don't move," she screamed, her voice tearing through the cabin. Finch, halfway up the steep attic stairs, froze. He looked down, his eyes widening in absolute horror, as he saw his hired muscle writhing on the ground and the frail, ruined tech CEO holding a suppressed firearm with surprisingly steady hands. "Miss Davenport," Finch stammered, raising his hands slowly, his aristocratic facade crumbling. "Let us not do anything rash. We can come to an arrangement, a partnership." "Get down here," Chloe ordered, her finger resting dangerously close to the trigger. "Slowly. If you make a sudden movement, I will shoot you. The FBI already thinks I'm a mastermind criminal. You think I care about adding a corrupt lawyer to the list?" Finch descended the stairs, trembling violently. Chloe forced him to drag the groaning Donovan into the tiny, walled-off bathroom. Once both men were inside, she slammed the heavy wooden door shut and wedged the heavy steel crowbar under the doorknob, effectively barricading them in a windowless cell. With her immediate threat neutralized, Chloe worked with terrifying efficiency. She couldn't take all the gold. It was physically impossible to load $26 million worth of heavy metal into a Honda Civic alone. Instead, she packed her duffel bag with the velvet pouches of rare coins and 3 solid gold bars. It was roughly $4 million in untraceable assets, weighing nearly 40 pounds. It was enough to start the war. She took the keys to Finch's Range Rover from the table where he had dropped them. She slashed the tires of her own Honda to make it look entirely disabled, locked the heavy front door of the cabin from the outside with the padlock she had found in the shed, and drove the Range Rover down the mountain. The men in the bathroom would eventually break out, but it would take them hours, and they had a 20-mile walk to the nearest highway. 48 hours later, Chloe Davenport was sitting in the ultra-exclusive, mahogany-paneled boardroom of Victoria Langdon, the most feared and expensive white-collar criminal defense attorney in Seattle. Langdon, a shark in a tailored Chanel suit, looked at the 3 solid gold bars resting on her glass conference table. "I don't accept standard currency right now," Chloe said calmly, sipping a sparkling water. "I need you to dismantle the FBI's case against me. I need you to find Natalie Ford's offshore accounts, and I need absolute discretion." Langdon traced the Swiss refinery stamp on the gold. A slow, dangerous smile crept across her face. "Miss Davenport, for this kind of retainer, I will personally guarantee that the federal government owes you a public apology by the end of the month." Langdon delivered. Using the vast resources funded by Theodore's gold, Langdon's private investigators tracked Natalie Ford to a luxury villa in Costa Rica within a week. They bypassed local authorities and secured the digital ledger Natalie had used to move the stolen Aeroflow funds. The evidence proving Chloe's forged signatures was airtight. 3 weeks later, the FBI held a press conference formally exonerating Chloe Davenport and announcing the international extradition of Natalie Ford. But Chloe wasn't finished. She turned her sights on Richard Kingsley, the fiancé who had abandoned her. Using a shell corporation funded by the liquidation of the rare numismatic coins, Chloe aggressively shorted the stock of the boutique investment firm, where Richard was a senior partner. She then anonymously leaked a dossier of the firm's highly unethical trading practices Richard himself had bragged to her about during their engagement, to the SEC. The firm's stock plummeted, wiping out Richard's portfolio and resulting in his immediate termination and a permanent ban from the financial industry. As for Gregory Finch, he never reported the incident at the cabin. He couldn't. Admitting he was there would expose his attempt to steal a client's estate. Instead, Chloe anonymously tipped off the Oregon State Bar Association with evidence she had recovered from Finch's own abandoned briefcase in the Range Rover, revealing decades of his predatory practices against elderly clients. He was disbarred and indicted on 14 counts of fraud. 6 months after the rainy night, she arrived at the rotting cabin, Chloe Davenport stood on the pristine deck of her new, custom-built lake house overlooking Lake Washington. She had repurchased aeroflow systems for pennies on the dollar, restructured the entire board, and secured a new logistics contract that tripled the company's valuation. The remaining $22 million in gold had been quietly and legally transferred to a subterranean vault in Geneva through Langdon's elite financial contacts. She watched the sunset paint the water in brilliant shades of orange and violet. She had lost everything. She had been betrayed by the people she trusted most. But the forest had given her a fortune, and she had used it to forge herself into something unbreakable. What an incredible journey of betrayal, survival, and ultimate revenge. Chloe's story proves that sometimes hitting rock bottom is just the universe's way of clearing the path for an unimaginable comeback. If this story of hidden gold and ruthless justice kept you on the edge of your seat, smash that like button and hit subscribe. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder to never give up, and drop a comment below. What would you do with $35 million in hidden gold?